program, which is serious money wherever you live in the world, to try to put money into communities to try to bring jobs back. And the administration's big worry was in doing that, it would create lots of opportunities for fraud and waste. And so it decided it was going to track the money, but not only just track the money, but track the money by allowing anybody anywhere to determine what projects were going on their street. $800 billion worth of programs that can be tracked to your address. Here's Boston, so I put that up there just as an example, and each dot represents a federal program funded by the Recovery Act. And different colors represent grants, contracts, and loan programs. And then if you click on any of those dots, you can get information about how much money was being spent and what the program was for. Really pretty stunning. A couple things happened out of this. First, it became possible to simply track it and do it in an amazing kind of way. Secondly, the administration was concerned about attacks from the Republicans about spending all this money, just obviously wasting it. Well, it was clear that there was a dot in every Republican district, then it became much harder to try to attack the program. Then, to show you how the conversation worked, when you start clicking on these dots, one of the things that happens is one may be run by a job training agency, one by a housing agency, one by a community services agency, and I showed this at one point to a college first-year freshman student who said within 30 seconds, the right question, which is, what if they talk to each other? Because once you put those dots up there, the question of coordination becomes inescapable, because you're not talking about programs or agencies, but neighborhoods. You're talking about how government interacts to affect people where they live. You have accountability that operates by place and not by agency or program. And it becomes impossible to walk away from the question of, there's another program 2 blocks away that is very similar to what I'm working on, run by a different agency, and we probably ought to talk. And that kind of coordination becomes inescapable. On top of that, what is truly remarkable in terms of connecting with citizens is that I have an iPhone here, and on the iPhone, the administration created an app to be able to do exactly what's available here. It's called recovery.gov. You can even do this if you have an iPhone on your very own personal iPhone. I have that map here. So this is a live picture from Australia of money that's being spent in Boston, Massachusetts, and I can click on any of these buttons and find out what's going on in a way that allows me to drill down to what's going on to individual jurisdictions. It's just simply an amazing and remarkable thing. And the bet was that by allowing citizens to connect to their government by what's going on here, that you carry the government in your pocket and connecting what it does to you, for you, and with you in these individual pieces, it becomes simply inescapable. That is just, I think, a really remarkable achievement, technically at least, in trying to figure out what it is that government does. And it transforms the accountability language in a fundamental and important kind of way. I can put in the address of any city, any state in the entire country and get to the block level, including outside my front door at home, what it is that the government's doing on the basis of this. This is pretty amazing. Now, the question is whether or not anybody cares. Is anybody really going to pay any attention to this? But there's a kind of a quiet bet that's emerging in the United States that part of what has to happen is redefining what accountability means and connecting in that kind of way with these kinds of conclusions. First, to drive accountability with data collected in real time. Not what happened last year or the year before or 5 years ago, but with, for example, rats reported in the last week where the mayor has a meeting and brings the people in who have a piece of the rat problem. Real-time data. Second, focusing on outcome indicators. If you notice, rats are a kind of outcome. They're a kind of proxy measure for substandard housing and dilapidated conditions in inner cities. And so they become, dealing with rats is an outcome, but it also is an outcome, because you can't deal with rats without improving the overall quality of the neighborhood. In addition to that, there's relentless follow-up by mayors who say, or governors, depending on who's adopting the system to I'm going to be back and back and back again with leadership that drives those kinds of results. Third thing is an idea of accountability and management and a connection with citizens that is not focused on how can I make my program work better, how can I make my agency work better, but how can I make the neighborhood in which my citizens live work better. Having accountability and management focused on place is a revolutionary concept. Those of you who are fans and students of the new public management know that this explodes a lot of the underlying arguments, but it's a different kind of approach because it frames a different way of trying to get at this, which is then also designed to create incentives for people to have these kinds of conversations and using that to crack a dilemma of accountability. Now the question is, I have no idea whether or not this is going to work. I have no idea whether or not this is the next big thing. I have no idea whether or not connecting government to citizens in their pocket on one of these things will be anything that anybody will ever pay really serious attention to. But I have a sneaking suspicion about two things in conclusion. The first is that doing more of the same of what we're now doing is going to produce more of the same in terms of results. And we have a situation in terms of trust in government and fiscal constraint that demands radical transformation in the way in which we're thinking about this. The second thing is that framing this as a problem of performance and accountability based on information as the driver for changing incentives is at least a pretty interesting approach that offers some hope. So the first part of my talk, I know, was probably pretty depressing. But you're depressed. I have to still go back home. I'm still going to have these in my pocket. So you at least have Aussie dollars and Kiwi dollars that will at least be worth something. But more importantly, I think we're in the middle of a really radical, potentially exciting transformation that gives us the chance to rethink what it is that government is and how it works, and most importantly, how it connects with citizens. Thanks a lot. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Did you say radical? I apologize. Now, we only have 5 minutes before the break. And I'm trying to figure out how to handle what I know will be a number of questions. And what I would like to propose is that we get a number of you to ask questions, and Don, you answer once. You wrap up. But we need to do this fast. I need a question from here, 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 and there. And so if we can move the microphones around. Do we have a question? There's a question at the back, please. Question here. A couple questions over there. Okay, so we'll go with those 4 for now, and I'm going to slip in one too. Okay, please.
Hi, it's Alan Asher. Don, you suggested that we've reached a point of diminishing returns with continuing reforms under that new public administration paradigm. I want to suggest, though, to you and ask your response, might that be part of what you might call the policy delusion, that the policy makers have been through that process and understood all of the changes that are needed and new forms of consultation, but I don't think that's got anywhere near the actual implementation of policies. I'm a Commonwealth Ombudsman, and just last week in speaking to all my state colleagues, the number of complaints each year that ombudsmen are getting are going up by 15, 20, 25% about all the same old things. Discourtesy, complex language of government, failure to explain, all of those which are really just administration 101 in the old paradigm. So I just don't think that this new administration philosophy is really driving delivery.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Don't bring the sound up.
Is that on?
Yes.
Yep. Doris Gibb from Commonwealth Attorney General's Department. I think one of the themes that is coming across the conference is leadership. And, you know, my question to you, because I have a view of my own that I think we need a new type of leadership in this new paradigm, you know, what do you think that leadership looks like? And, you know, how do we move towards that?
Oh, that's a good question.
Thank you. At the back, please. Oh, okay.
Yes, John Phillimore from Curtin University. Also, I used to work for the West Australian government. It sounded to me like you ended up with two big ideas. One was, if you like, information, or the new technology, what Patrick Dunleavy calls digital e-governance, and the second was place-based reforms. The place-based issue, I'm just wondering, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about using place-based reform in the past, especially in a country as big as Australia, I guess also as big as the US. Is place-based reform a thing for operational outputs, but while the policy still gets determined in the centre? Because that's one of the major issues in terms of, you know, what are we determining here? I mean, the centre still has all the knowledge, and then they get the people down on the ground to actually perform it in place, which it sounded a bit like your rat-catching example.
And is there one more question? Okay, please.
Hello, Catherine from the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department. I was just wondering, in terms of solutions, with giving, you know, agencies control or a role in rat catching, whether in fact that more perpetuated the view that it was a government sort of problem, and whether government should have, in a sense, have provided people with rat traps to have some role in it themselves. And the second thing was just, again, yes, thinking about the solution, picking up from the previous comment, was whether that sort of place-based information works particularly well for local government, whether it works very well for state government sort of programs. But in a country like ours, where we have so many federal electorates, every time the Commonwealth Government tries to put out information about where it's spent, it gets effectively demonised in the press as being slush funding and spending.
Great, thank you. My question cuts across those and really has to do with, there's a longer way to do this, but the shorter version is that regardless of the decisions that the Congress and the President make, there's going to be a lot less of some things, big cuts. And so what I'm wondering is if the solution consistent with American history is to really have leadership that is born more out of the mutual aid, social enterprise, cooperative solutions that would be consistent with what you talked about, and I haven't heard much about that.
Yep.
Okay.
Those are sort of all good, all terrific questions, and answering them will take about an hour and a half, I think. So in the interest of not standing between you and your tea, let me try to sort of come at this in a sort of a capsule way. I think all of these issues are reducible, in a sense, to leadership. And a couple thoughts. The first is that the paradox of the increasing complexity of the state is that the role of the individual leader has become more important. We've really spent, in the new public management, a large amount of time trying to not so much wring out the importance of the leader per se, but to try to create constructs that force leaders to be able to lead. And it turns out that I think that's where we've begun to run out of gas, because increasingly what the leadership that's required is kind of reaching out. A lesson from Hurricane Katrina in the United States, where we had horrendous problems of performance, and the initial first phase failed largely because of efforts to try to manage the program within agency boundaries, that is, rescuing people within the constructs of the agencies. And solutions began to happen when leaders arrived and began to understand that the problem was not managing the federal agency in charge of emergency response, but that there were people who were stuck on rooftops and needed to be rescued. And the transformation happened when government agencies and their assets were deployed to solve the problems of people where they lived, as opposed to managing the individual agencies more effectively. So I think that is, in many ways, the nutshell. And that's the answer in part to the local government service piece, because at least in the United States, citizens don't know, don't care, and don't think that they ought to have to bother figuring out which agency is in charge of the problem that's out their front door. They just want the government to respond. And one of the government's problems is trying to figure out how to connect the problem and the need for a response to the people who are responsible for fixing it. And the fixes often lie in multiple agencies, and so government's second layer problem is trying to figure out how to weave that together. But by beginning by saying, okay, you got a problem in front of your house, we're going to try to fix it, is the foundation for trying to figure out how to make that collaboration work. But then the bigger challenge of trying to figure out how to do this within the construct of fiscal constraint is really double. We're not going to be able to do all of what it is that we, in the past, maybe have been able to do, or certainly all that citizens expect, because my sense is, although I haven't seen any data, the citizens' expectations have soared exponentially. And we're simply not going to be able to deal with all of that. But there are a couple things. One is, maybe it provides a way of providing some reassurance to citizens that we're listening to you and we're connecting, And there are some things that are high priority and high visibility. In America, after heavy snowstorms, big potholes in the middle of the road are things that annoy people, and having guarantees that get those